King Charles has finally done it.
King Charles's brother Prince Edward was supposed to be joining King Charles for a major event, but he was forced to pull out at the last minute.
He obviously would have known about it. You don't just go onto the king's private property without his knowledge.
What if everything the king thought was his wasn't? For 73 years, Charles waited to inherit the throne in the private wealth of Queen Elizabeth II.
Charles ascends to the throne at 73, the longest wait in British history.
But much of it was quietly left to Edward, the youngest, overlooked son. So what happens when the quiet prince suddenly asserts his claim? For 3 years, Charles managed those assets as his own. Now Edward is claiming them back, and the monarchy is facing a test it has never confronted before. The assumption of the heir. To understand why Charles assumed what he assumed, you have to understand how inheritance actually works at this level. Not just royal inheritance, aristocratic inheritance. The logic that has governed wealth transfer in Britain's elite families for centuries. The rule is simple, brutal, and almost completely unchallenged. The eldest inherits. Not just the title, not just the estate. Everything that can be passed down gets passed to the firstborn. Younger siblings receive what can charitably be described as token gestures, modest allowances, smaller properties, the understanding that they are secondary characters in someone else's story. This is not a Windsor invention. This is the architecture of British aristocracy. It is why so many second sons went into the military or the church.
He dropped out of the grueling commando training course partway through and left the Marines.
It is why so many younger daughters married whoever would have them. The money flows upward to the heir and the heir alone. So Charles grew up inside that logic, not just intellectually, viscerally. Every protocol, every ceremony, every moment of his childhood reinforced the message. You are the one who matters financially. He was Prince of Wales from the age of 9. He held the Duchy of Cornwall from birth. The entire institutional machinery of the British monarchy was calibrated around him. Around his future, around his eventual inheritance. Now, here is where it gets complicated. Because royal wealth is not one thing. It's actually several completely separate things, and conflating them is exactly how this situation became possible. The Crown Estate is public land managed for the public benefit. The monarch doesn't own it personally. They are its custodian. The Duchy of Lancaster generates income for the sovereign and passed automatically to Charles the moment Elizabeth died. Yes, the Duchy of Cornwall, which Charles held as Prince of Wales and which now belongs to William.
I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear.
Is similarly institutional. These are not personal possessions. They are offices with assets attached. Then there is something else entirely, Elizabeth's private wealth. The money she accumulated personally over 70 years on the throne, properties she bought in her own name, art she purchased privately, investments held in personal accounts, jewelry acquired outside the royal collection. And this is separate from the crown jewels, separate from the royal residences, separate from every institutional asset, and it is substantial. Estimates of Elizabeth's personal fortune at the time of her death range from hundreds of millions to over £500 million. Nobody outside her executors knows the exact figure, and even they are bound by confidentiality. But what we do know is that she was methodical about her finances, personally engaged with her estate planning, and had decades to decide exactly what she wanted done with her private assets. Charles, overwhelmed with becoming king, managing a coronation, navigating the public grief of an entire nation.
King Charles III has been crowned at the Westminster Abbey in a ceremony full of pomp, pageantry, and solemn religious significance.
Establishing his own reign was operating on assumption. The assumption that he, as the eldest, as the heir, as the new king, would receive the bulk of her private estate as naturally as he received everything else. He was wrong, and not wrong in a small, easily corrected way. Maj wrong in a way that took 3 years to surface and will take lawyers considerably longer to fully untangle. Charles didn't set out to steal. He set out to inherit. He just inherited something wrong. The quiet inheritance. Royal wills in Britain exist in a peculiar legal space. They are not public documents. They are sealed. kept from public scrutiny by a centuries-old tradition that protects the privacy of the monarch's estate. Even senior members of the royal family are not automatically entitled to read the full contents. The executors manage distribution, the family receives what they've been left, and the document itself stays sealed. This matters because it explains the timeline. After Elizabeth died,
Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96, Britain's longest ruling monarch.
nobody was sitting around reading the will together. There was no dramatic family gathering. Executors worked quietly, discreetly in the background. And within weeks of the funeral, Edward was informed, privately, one carefully without fanfare, of exactly what his mother had left him. What he'd been left was not symbolic. It was not the kind of token gesture that younger siblings typically receive. It was, by any measure, a serious inheritance. A large private estate that Elizabeth had purchased personally, not a crown property, not a working royal residence, but land and buildings bought in her own name, valued at tens of millions of pounds. A significant portion of her personal art collection. Not the masterpieces that belong to the royal collection and the nation, but the pieces she bought privately, pieces with her own taste and history attached to them. Financial assets, cash, investments, holdings in her personal accounts. These were not crown assets. They were not institutional wealth. They were hers, and she chose, deliberately and specifically, to leave them to Edward. Why Edward? We can speculate. Edward was the youngest. He was the one who stayed close, who showed up without drama, who built a life that kept him near the center of the family without ever seeking the spotlight. He was the one who quietly took on more and more royal duties when others stepped back. He was, by multiple accounts from people who knew Elizabeth, genuinely close to his mother in her later years. Present in ways that his more famous, more controversial siblings sometimes weren't. She left him a meaningful share of what she owned. That's not an accident. That's a decision. But Charles's staff, in the months and years following Elizabeth's death, continued managing those assets as though they were part of the broader royal estate. There was no malicious intent established, at least not yet. There was simply an assumption, built over decades, that was never challenged until it had to be. 3 years passed, and in those 3 years, Charles was operating as the effective custodian of assets that legally, documentably, belonged to his brother, the patient prince. September 2022 to early 2026, 3.5 years. In that time, Charles's household was managing an estate he had no legal authority over. Decisions were being made about maintenance, about upkeep, possibly about income generation from those properties. If the estate produced any revenue during those years, that revenue belongs to Edward. That accounting will need to happen. That is not a small thing. But Edward said nothing. At least not immediately, not publicly. And this is one of the most human parts of this story, because his silence makes complete sense if you know anything about who Edward is. Edward has spent his entire royal life being the uncomplicated one. When Andrew's reputation collapsed, when Charles's marriage imploded, when Harry and Meghan left,
Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle have stepped back from the royal life, from their royal duty.
Edward kept his head down, did his duties, stayed out of the papers. He and Sophie built a marriage that royal observers consistently describe as the most functional in the family. They raised their children, Lady Louise and James, Viscount Severn, with a deliberate normalcy that stands in stark contrast to almost every other Windsor of their generation. Edward is not confrontational by nature. He is not someone who charges into battles. He is patient. He is measured. He has had decades of practice at being overlooked and deciding it wasn't worth the fight. But there is someone in Edward's life who is neither patient nor inclined to let things slide. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, is one of the most underrated figures in the modern royal family. She came into the institution as a commoner, built her role through genuine commitment rather than birthright, and has over 25 years developed into one of the most respected working royals in the family. She is not decorative. She is operational. She pays attention. She understands how institutions work and how they can fail the people inside them. And Sophie looked at what was happening, at the assets her husband had been left by his mother, sitting under his brother's management, generating income that wasn't flowing to them, and made a decision. She has children. Lady Louise is in her early 20s, building her own life. James is still a teenager. Sophie is a mother who has watched her family be quietly sidelined for years. No HRH titles for the children, reduced status, the persistent sense that the Edinburghs are the royal family's afterthought. Elizabeth's will was a correction of that, a specific, deliberate correction from a mother to her son, and Sophie decided it was time to act on it. The exact conversations that happened between Edward and Sophie in late 2025 are not public knowledge, but the outcome of those conversations is. Edward, for the first time in his life, decided to stop being overlooked. He instructed lawyers. He authorized them to act. Edward has spent his entire royal life being patient. Sophie decided that would end with their children. I want Mum's wishes. Here is something most people don't realize about how royal wills actually work. When Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022, her will didn't go through normal probate.
Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
It didn't enter any public record. There was no reading of the will in a room with the family present, no solicitor opening an envelope while grieving relatives sat in silence. Elizabeth's will, as the sovereign's will, is exempt from the entire probate process entirely. The courts have no jurisdiction over it. That's been established law since 1822. It exists outside the legal machinery that governs the rest of us. What that means practically is that the distribution of her private estate happened quietly, privately, and managed by her personal executors with complete discretion. The family learned what they were left not from a public document, not from a headline, but from a confidential notification. You get a call or a letter from the people tasked with carrying out her wishes, and then you know. Edward knew. He knew from late 2022 what his mother had left him. The documentation was clear. The executors had done their work with the precision you'd expect of people who spent decades serving one of the most meticulous women in British public life. And for roughly 3 years, he sat with that knowledge while Charles's household continued managing assets that weren't Charles's to manage. Now let's talk about what happens when that changes. The legal notice Edward's lawyers sent to Charles's representatives wasn't the opening move of someone who wanted a fight. It was the final move of someone who had run out of patience for the situation to correct itself. And when it arrived, formal, documented, specific, naming the assets and asserting legal ownership, the reaction inside the palace was, by all accounts, immediate and complete disarray. Because nobody had modeled this scenario. Nobody in Charles's operation had looked at those assets and said, wait, are we certain these are ours? The assumption had calcified into institutional fact. Now Charles's staff managed them. Charles's accounts recorded income from them. The machinery of the royal household had absorbed them so naturally that the question of legal authority had simply never been asked. Until it had to be. The legal review that followed was urgent and ultimately humiliating. Charles's legal team needed to examine the actual underlying documentation. What had the executors certified? What did the will specifically say? Was there any ambiguity? On any interpretive room? Any procedural challenge that could be mounted? There wasn't. Remember, Elizabeth's will operates entirely outside the court system. It cannot be challenged in probate. It cannot be contested through the usual mechanisms. What Elizabeth's executors certified as her wishes is her wishes, with the full force of a woman who had been planning her estate with some of the finest legal minds in Britain for decades. The documents were clean. Edward's claim was valid. Charles had been acting without legal authority for 3 years. The palace's next move was the one institutions always make when they have lost the legal argument. They tried to negotiate around it. Equivalent assets were reportedly offered. A comparable property, financial compensation in lieu of what Edward had actually been left. The message, dressed in the language of pragmatism and family harmony, was essentially, take something similar, let's keep this quiet, let's not make this into what it could become. Edward's answer was not what they expected. He wanted what his mother left him, not a substitute, not a compromise, not an equivalent that the palace's lawyers had selected for its convenience. The specific assets, Elizabeth's documented wishes, carried out as she intended them. That answer, simple, unmovable, grounded entirely in legal reality, is the moment this situation became something the palace could no longer contain within its usual management of inconvenient truths. Because you can spin a substitution. You cannot spin a man saying, "I want what my mother left me," and being completely, documentably correct. The sealed nature of royal wills means their contents remain confidential, when with the tradition dating back to 1910, trust and will, which is precisely what made this situation so structurally explosive. Had Elizabeth's will been a public document, this discrepancy would have surfaced within months. The executors, the beneficiaries, anyone paying attention would have seen immediately that certain assets belonged to Edward. But the secrecy that protects the royal family from public scrutiny also created the fog inside which this mismanagement became possible. The president of the family division currently keeps over 30 sealed royal wills in a safe in London guest walker. A strong box of family secrets, managed by Sir Andrew MacFarlane, accessible to almost nobody. The same tradition that shielded the contents of Elizabeth's final wishes from public view also meant that the internal distribution could proceed without external accountability. No journalist could check. No researcher could verify. The family itself operated on what they were told. And what Charles was told, or perhaps simply assumed, turned out to be wrong. The quiet brother finally spoke. He said 4 words that the entire palace apparatus had no answer to. "I want Mum's wishes, and no one. Not the king's lawyers, not the palace communications team, not the centuries of institutional tradition designed to absorb and neutralize exactly this kind of disruption, had prepared a response. The sealed reckoning, the assets will transfer. That much is certain. The legal clarity is not in dispute, and whatever private negotiations are still ongoing, the outcome of those negotiations is predetermined. Edward gets what Elizabeth left him. That is the only legally defensible endpoint. But the process of getting there is where the damage lives. Because Charles doesn't just hand over a property and call it done. He has to account for 3 years of management. If those assets generated income, rental income, agricultural income, any returns on financial investments, that money belongs to Edward, and Charles owes him an accounting of every penny. That is not optional. That is what happens when you have managed someone else's assets without their authorization. You account for it. That accounting will be uncomfortable. Not because there was deliberate theft, there almost certainly wasn't, but because it will reveal the full extent of how deeply embedded the assumption was. How many decisions were made? Or how many people were involved? How long it continued after it should have been flagged? And then there is the relationship. Charles and Edward were never close in the way that people mean when they talk about brothers who are genuinely friends. The age gap, their different temperaments, the sheer difference in their royal status, these things created distance long before any of this. But there was a functional relationship, respect at minimum, loyalty, at least on Edward's side. There are lawyers as intermediaries now. You don't recover from that easily. You don't move past formal legal notices and asset transfers and compensation negotiations to Sunday lunches and warm conversations. The machinery of the law, once engaged between family members, leaves marks that personal warmth cannot fully cover. Charles will know every time he sees Edward that his brother had to force him to honor their mother's wishes. Edward will know that Charles required forcing. For the public, the optics are damaging in a specific way that the palace is poorly equipped to manage. The royal family's entire public proposition rests on a combination of pageantry and unity, the suggestion of harmony even when it's performative. What this story does is not just reveal a dispute, it reveals an assumption. It reveals that Charles operated for years with the belief that his birthright superseded his mother's documented final wishes, that being king meant being entitled, that the younger brother would simply accept whatever he was given and remain grateful. That assumption says something about Charles that no statement from Buckingham Palace will fully address. And what does it say about Edward? Something rather different, that he is more formidable than he has been given credit for. That his years of patience were a choice, not a limitation. That when something genuinely important was at stake, not his own ego, not his status, but his children's financial security and his mother's clear wishes, he was entirely capable of acting decisively, of absorbing the discomfort, of saying the thing that needed to be said even when it meant legal confrontation with the king. Behind every underestimated man is usually someone who saw his worth clearly from the beginning. Behind Edward is Sophie, who spent years watching her family be quietly diminished, who looked at Elizabeth's will as a correction that deserved to be honored, who refused to allow her children's inheritance to evaporate through inertia and institutional assumption. Every powerful man has someone behind him. Behind Edward is a woman who refused to let her family be invisible. The forward-looking questions are the ones that will define the next decade of the Windsor family's private reality. Will Charles resent Edward for this? Almost certainly, some part of him will. Not because Edward did anything wrong, but because the situation forced Charles to confront something deeply uncomfortable about his own assumptions. Resentment rarely attaches to the person who was actually in the right. It attaches to the person who made us see that we were wrong. Will Edward's standing rise? It should. He enforced his mother's wishes against the most powerful man in the family. He did it quietly, legally, without a press briefing or a Netflix documentary or a bombshell memoir. When he did it the way he does everything, through proper channels with documentation, without drama. In a royal family that has recently been defined by its most explosive figures, a prince who wins by being completely, unassailably correct is genuinely novel. And then there is the question nobody is yet asking loudly, but everyone is thinking, what else is in that will? If Elizabeth left meaningful assets to Edward, what did she leave to Andrew? To Anne? Were there conditions attached? Any stipulations, specific requests that executors are managing quietly in the background? Elizabeth was meticulous. She had decades and excellent counsel. Her will almost certainly contains more specificity than anyone has yet acknowledged publicly. The sealed document that protects her final wishes is still sealed. What it contains, beyond what has now come to light, remains in the hands of executors in the private knowledge of those who were told. In the halls of power, one tradition and expectation can feel absolute, until a document reminds you they are not. Edward has claimed what was his, and the king has learned that even legacy can be challenged. But this isn't just about money or titles or who sits where at Sandringham. It's about authority, loyalty, and the fragility of assumptions that have endured for centuries. When a quiet prince can upend the order the monarchy depends on, what does that mean for the next crisis and for the family that must survive it?